Hi, Year 5 and 6. Now, in today's session, we are going to be writing the ending to our story. So before we begin, I want you to pause this video and answer these questions. So have a little think about what is the purpose of an ending. Now, that can be in any text, and then think about our story as well. What makes a good ending, and why is it important to plan your ending? So if you pause the video now and have a little think. Okay, so what is the purpose of an ending? As we know, when we've looked at all different types of texts, the purpose of an ending is to wrap up all of your main ideas. And obviously in a story, that will be like the solution to the problem that may have happened, and obviously tie up all those loose ends to give the reader some kind of closure to the story. Now, what makes a good ending? Now, in a story, it's always really important that the ending links back to the beginning. That ensures that the reader has all those themes that's run through the text answered and all the problems solved at the end. And that links us to why it's important to plan your ending. All good writers know that if you want an ending that's going to make the reader feel probably satisfied, as we'd say, and that it's been a really good story, it's important that it links back to that beginning. And if you've not planned that, you're going to get quite stuck partway through thinking how you can link back. So obviously that's why we planned our story. Now in today's lesson, we are learning to link the ending to the beginning of the story. So today we'll focus on writing the ending of your story, and obviously this will depend on your ideas, how you chose to end the story. So look back at your ideas from your plan, from this section. So this should look quite familiar. So across the weeks, you've been planning your story. We did a lot of it together. We had the same ideas, and then it was your job to choose how you wanted to end that story. And that's a bit we are focusing on today. Now, obviously, because the ending has to link back to the beginning, I'm going to model how my ending is going to link back to my beginning. Now, this is the beginning that you saw in previous lessons. So we'd like to pause the video now and just refresh yourself about how my story began. Okay, so you'll remember that in this, it was all about how George was leaving his family. He was really upset to do so. And obviously, the key thing here was that he was saying, this paragraph, I have to find a new job, and I promise it won't be long until you and Mummy can come and join me. And that was kind of the hope for the whole story, wasn't it? So here is my example of an ending that links back to that beginning. It had taken a long time, but day by day and bit by bit, this place was finally starting to feel like it could be home. After several months, George was settled into his new life. The money was regular, and he had found a little house that would be perfect for him, Catherine and Elizabeth. The brightest part of his week was when a letter would land on the mat, and it was filled with tales of Lizzie's latest adventures. He missed them terribly, and he knew it was time for him to bring them to their new home. George was filled with excitement as he sat down to write one of the most important letters in his life. It was short and sweet. He wrote 3 words: "It is time." He put an envelope of money alongside it and sealed it tight with instructions for Catherine to follow. George could barely contain his glee as he posted the envelope into the postbox. Now all he could do was wait, and soon his family would arrive and life would be perfect once again. So that's my ending. Now I've got the question here: how has this ending been linked to my beginning? So I'd like to pause the video and write down your ideas of how I have linked back in different ways to my beginning. Okay, so hopefully you will have picked up on the fact that I have said already that in my beginning, I talked about how he promised his family that he will find a new job and it won't be long until you'll be able to come and join me. And that's obviously the key feature of my ending. After several months, he'd settled in his new life, he's got his job, he's found a house, and then obviously he writes to his family so they can come and join him. So when I've linked back there, it's that key idea that he promised he'll be able to bring them to him, and now he's achieved it. And that actually wraps everything up nicely for the reader. Now, as well as linking your ending to the beginning, you need to be thinking about what you've looked at over this week, which is creating links between paragraphs and entertaining the reader by weaving action, dialogue, and emotions. Because remember, it's so important when you're writing that story that all those other things, processes, and sentences you've been using and different features of your story need to be continued even to the ending. So let's have a little look at creating links between paragraphs just to remind ourselves. So we know that for cohesion, remember that's linking our ideas together, and we're thinking about between paragraphs. Here I'd said it was starting to feel like home, and then I've used an adverbial phrase, after several months. Now this shows that time has moved on, and it talks about now his new life. Now at the end of this paragraph here, it says, He knew it was time for him to bring them to their new home. And I opened my next paragraph, saying George was filled with excitement as he sat down to write one of the important letters of his life, which we know was to bring his family home. So I have ended that paragraph talking about him bringing them. And then the next paragraph is obviously the fact how he brings them, which is the letter. Now, when you did the lesson with Mrs. Farrington about cohesion, remember, it's not just between paragraphs, but it's within paragraphs. So Mrs. Farrington had modelled that when George had first arrived at his new destination, it was a lot of words linked to unfamiliar and strange, because obviously it's the fact that he'd moved somewhere that he'd not been before. He didn't speak the language, he couldn't read the language, it was very, very different. So that idea of strange and unfamiliarness was repeated throughout those paragraphs. Now here, what the feeling here is obviously not the strangeness, it's the excitement. So I've made sure I've talked about how his feelings have changed a lot now. The brightest part of his week, again, linking back to his family. And then he's filled with excitement as he's writing the letter to his family. He could barely contain his glee. And remember, glee is obviously that really, really happy feeling. And again, it's just to end. Now, all he could do was wait, and soon his family would arrive and life would be perfect once again. So here it's that repeated idea of happiness and excitement that his family will be reunited. And that's what really helps this ending flow. You'll also notice that we always know the first line and last line of the text are usually the ones that the reader remembers the most. The first hooks them in, and obviously the ending, the very last sentence, of the ending is also really important, and this is quite powerful. Now, all he could do was wait, and soon his family would arrive and life would be perfect once again. And it reiterates that key point about being back with his family. Because if we look back at the beginning, the repeated idea in this beginning as well was how close he was to his family and how heartbreaking it was to leave them. So it's lovely that this story then ends saying it'll be perfect again. So that was where we were creating links between paragraphs. The other thing you've been looking at in your writing this week, we've got the dialogue. Now that's obviously adding speech in the text. Now, if you put that in your beginning and your middle, you don't necessarily have to put it in your ending. That's up to you. It might be that it's appropriate for your ending, but remember, in all writing, sometimes a little bit is enough. You don't need to have it the whole way through. It can turn into just one continuous conversation rather than a story. However, you might want to look at the weaving action and emotions. If we look back to my one here, it's very much about his emotions, and also it's contrasting from that beginning and that middle when it was unfamiliar, strange, he was worried, he was anxious, and it's contrasting those emotions now about how the problems have been resolved. He's got enough money to bring his family to him. And it's a lot of that excitement. It says the brightest part of his week. He missed them terribly. He was filled with excitement, and it was the barely contain his glee. So remember that when you're thinking about feelings, you might think you've got to keep reiterating those points. So you are going to write your ending today. Remember, I'll just flick back to remind yourself. You are linking the ending back to the beginning of the story, and you're going to make sure you use your plan for that. And that'll be quite different because obviously we've all chosen to end our story differently. So I'm really looking forward to seeing what people have done there. But while doing that, you're also thinking, as we have this week, creating links between paragraphs, entertaining the reader by weaving action, dialogue, and emotions. And the previous teaching videos are still on the school website for that. So if you feel like you want to have a look at those things again, do re-watch the other videos. Okay, so I hope you enjoy finishing your story, and I can't wait to read them.